Good morning. It's great to be with you all today here at day 2 of our Coalition for Prosperous America virtual fly-in. This is going to be one of our busiest days, and for an event that's really perhaps bigger and better than ever. It's unfortunate we can't all be together, but on the other hand, this format allows perhaps more of you to be involved and get a little more participation. So I'm really excited to tell you about what's going to be happening today for day 2. We're going to be starting with our tax policy discussion. I'm actually a part of the panel, but there's some people who are a lot smarter than me regarding tax policy. So we're going to talk about changes in tax policy that can help America's producers be more competitive, how we can sell more in America, and how we can sell more globally. Also, we're going to hear from Senator Mike Crapo. He's a Republican from Idaho, and we're going to hear from Representative Bill Prosperous. He's a Democrat from New Jersey. Really highlights some of the bipartisan work we're doing here at CPA, the fact that we've got these great people joining us today. Then later on in the day, you're going to hear from some of our Buy American experts on our Buy American panel. We've got 3 dynamic policy leaders coming together today to discuss country of origin labeling and de minimis. Country of origin labeling is really important when we want to give American producers a fair shot at the marketplace. Studies show that overwhelmingly Americans would prefer to buy American products, but too often a country of origin labeling either obscures the origin or it's just not there at all. When we look at beef and pork and even online purchases, it's sometimes really hard to tell where the product came from. And so we want to make sure consumers have the choice. You'll hear from some of these experts. The other subject, de minimis, its very name means small, but de minimis is not a small issue. It's a really big issue. And what this relates to is items coming in through customs, and we have a level stated at which things are not really inspected, not really looked at. Unfortunately, in the United States, that level is too high. It's very generous. It allows a lot of products to come in here without inspection. And we're really the only country that does that. Other countries are smarter, and they collect some taxes and they do some proper inspection to make sure their consumers are getting the product they were supposed to buy and not a knockoff or even a dangerous product. So country of origin labeling and de minimis, 2 really important issues. And we'll hear from Claudia Tenney. She's a representative, Republican from New York. We'll also hear from Senator Cynthia Lummis. She's a Republican from Wyoming. And rounding out the panel, we'll hear from Senator Tammy Baldwin. She's a Democrat from Wisconsin. 3 really important people who know these issues and can help us learn about them and talk about the policy direction that we can go to make sure Americans are getting safe products, the food they wanted, the medicines that they know they can trust, things like that. Then later on in the day, the last hour, we're going to be hearing from our own board member, Bill Bullard. Bill also represents RCAF. That's the Ranchers Cattlemen Legal Action Fund. And he's been a leader in talking about what he's going to tell you about today, rebuilding America's largest agricultural sector. That's ranching and independent ranchers and cattlemen. And, I've had the pleasure to get to know Bill and hear from him. I know you're going to enjoy his presentation too. But these are the kind of things that we need to talk about to bring back the productive power of America and keep America moving forward for our national security, for our health, and for our safety, and for these good jobs that all these Americans enjoy. So I'm excited for today. I know you will enjoy the day. I look forward to seeing you later on in some of the virtual sessions and at day 3 and day 4 of our event. So thank you for participating today. Look forward to connecting with you soon. It's great to be here with you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on day 2, as Zach said, for our Coalition for a Prosperous America annual conference. I'm your MC, Melissa Tallman, Marketing and Membership Director here at CPA. I want to give a quick little shout out and thank you and extend our thanks to our annual conference sponsors. I have our premier sponsors, MFGgear, the Manufacturer Local Movement, restoring pride for manufacturing in the USA. Visit them at mfggear.com. Also, IT GuidePoint. IT GuidePoint fits technology to your business purpose by utilizing process data and metrics as a competitive advantage. They streamline the selection discussions to facts and identify gaps that lead to cost overruns and ERP failure. Visit them at itguidepoint.com. We also have SK International. SK International has become the solution provider of choice for innovation, creativity, and customization. Over the years, they've completed over 400 projects. We'd also like to go ahead and thank Amodex, the eco-friendly ink stain remover that works on all inks from ballpoint pens and gel to permanent marker. Visit them at amodex.com. And last, the Concilio Group. The company's committed to identifying proper funding sources and partners, customizing programs to meet government requirements, and then making the appropriate pitches and networks to enable funding. Visit them at conciliogroup.com. It's my pleasure to introduce Michael Stumo, our CEO of CPA. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Melissa. You're doing a great job with this conference. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor is yours.
I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened yesterday and then a little more detail about what to expect today. So yesterday we had our healthcare panel, and that started out, for those who missed it or for those who forgot, it started out with Vicki Hartzler, who's a Congresswoman Republican from Missouri's 4th District. And Vicki Hartzler discussed the need to reshore pharmaceutical production and her legislation that would help do so. Then she's working with Congressman John Garamendi, a California Democrat, to reshore pharmaceutical production from China and other countries. And this is, we're finding with our healthcare committee that this is really, it's a topic that's very well received, I'll say, in Congress right now. And we're very active on it. And in this upcoming China bill with that Senator Schumer is pushing, we expect to have significant pieces of that bill on healthcare and reshoring pharmaceutical. We also had Eric Edwards, who's the CEO of Flow, PHLOW. Flow is a leader in advanced manufacturing, continuous flow manufacturing out of Virginia. And Eric is very dedicated to producing essential medicines, not the brand name medicines that you hear about on the television, but the commodities, the essential medicines, the active pharmaceutical ingredients for them, the medicines that need to be in all the ambulances, the emergency rooms, the hospitals, the crash carts. And we just don't have enough of them here. We're excessively relying on China and India. We also had Usman Ahmed, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Nexus Pharmaceutical, and he discussed his company's growth, his family company's growth in the last 17 years or so, growing when everyone else was offshoring. And they specialize in manufacturing difficult to produce drugs. And he and Eric and our healthcare committee chairwoman, Rosemary Gibson, chatted about how our healthcare committee's actions on this topic and what we need to do to reshore pharmaceutical production. Rosemary is the author of China RX. The next panel we had was on currency and currency misalignment. We continue at CPA with putting a high priority on fixing dollar overvaluation. We just had a huge the biggest goods trade deficit ever last year. It's going to get bigger under Biden unless the dollar is weakened to a point where we can balance trade. We heard from Jeff Ferry, our chief economist at CPA, and his recent studies on how much we need to realign the dollar, i.e. about 26%, what it would take to do so, and what would be the economic results, the economic growth results, and what would be the impact on our financial markets, interest rates, and inflation and ability to service debt. Brian O'Shaughnessy, the CEO of Revere Copper, actually the chairman of Revere Copper, spoke on his experience and how the overvalued dollar harms his company, Revere Copper, which produces copper sheet strip and coil in competition with the Germans and companies from other parts of the world, and how realigning the dollar would help him double his production and his employment. We also heard from Joe Gagnon, who is an economist formerly of the Federal Reserve, now as a fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. He studied global monetary policy and is supportive of reining in the dollar overvaluation through countervailing other countries' manipulation, our Fed countering other countries' central bank manipulation, and also the market access charge, which is something that we've proposed adopted from John Hanson, a former World Bank economist, which would be a variable rate tax on incoming capital flows, because those capital flows drive up the dollar to unsustainable heights. We also heard from Rob Scott, who's an economist from Economic Policy Institute, and it focuses on trade and manufacturing, and he presented some options on how we can realign the dollar and its importance. So that was a very good panel that went in depth. Mark Fasteau, our board member here, or actually our co-vice chairman here at CPA, who's really been focusing on currency for some time and is in the process of authoring a book on industrial strategy, being helped by our very own Ian Fletcher. Mark moderated the panel and guided it very well. And lastly, yesterday, we presented a CPA award to Rosemary Gibson, because she is really a leader in creating awareness for our dependence on China for essential medicines, for active pharmaceutical ingredients, how dangerous that is, not only from a national security standpoint, but from a quality standpoint. And indeed, her and Usman were very clear yesterday about the drugs that were made in China and India that don't do the job. The conditions are not sterile. The conditions are poor. The tests of the drugs mean they don't act like the original drug. And so Rosemary has a heavy following on Twitter and is really spreading this. And she's the bane of multinational pharmaceutical companies. We're lucky to have her leading our healthcare committee. Zach mentioned today what's going to happen. I'll go into a little bit more detail to guide you. Right after I am done speaking, in just a few minutes, we'll have labor talks with our very own board members from organized labor, Mike Dolan and Stan Sorscher. Mike Dolan of the Teamsters and Stan Sorscher, formerly of the Society of Professional Engineers, engineering employees in aerospace. And they'll give us a view of trade in the Biden administration from a labor perspective. The tax panel, I must say, we have more elected officials speaking at our conference. We're lucky to have them than ever. And that shows, I think, that we're a lot more powerful than we were a few years ago. And we're glad to have the elected officials here and work in tandem with them. And I'll say we're also glad to have John Toomey, our government relations director, with us, because he's the one who convinced the officials to come and speak with us. So as Zach mentioned, we'll have Senator Mike Crapo of Idaho speaking to us, as well as Representative Bill Pascrell, and actually a New Jersey Democrat. Crapo is the ranking member in the Senate Finance Committee. Bill Pascrell is a senior member on the House Ways and Means Committee. And this is, again, the tax panel. We're lucky to have G. Pritchard, who's the tax counsel for the Ways and Means majority staff, speak to us. She'll give us an insight into how the committee is thinking about tax this year. We, of course, at CPA are focused on tax policies that promote offshoring and that promote onshoring rather than promoting offshoring. Zach Model, our own chairman, will discuss how his company is affected in its competition with multinationals. And we're lucky to have Professor Reuven Aviona from the University of Michigan Law School. He's the director of the International Tax Program, and he is arguably the father of sales factor apportionment in its recent iteration that we have been very much in favor of as leveling the playing field between taxation of multinationals and domestic companies. We'll have a half-hour break after that 12:30 to 1:30 session. From 2 to 3, we'll have a panel on Buy America with country of origin labeling and the de minimis problem that Zach mentioned. And again, we have 3 Congress elected officials on that panel. Claudia Tenney, who narrowly won an election in New York. We're glad to have her. She's a Republican from New York 22. Senator Tammy Baldwin, Democrat from Wisconsin, who's been a real leader on the Democratic side for reshoring, manufacturing, country of origin labeling. She was a sponsor of the currency legislation that we've been extremely supportive of last year. So we're glad to have Senator Baldwin, and also Senator Cynthia Lummis, a Republican from Wyoming. She's a freshman and very strong on country of origin labeling. We'll have Brad Markell, our own board member from AFL-CIO, and moderating will be Greg Owens of Liberty Tabletop, the only manufacturer of flatware in the U.S., and Jim Stuber, who's also a co-chair of our Buy America committee with Greg, and Jim is the author of a book called What If Things Were Made in America Again. And then so that'll be 1 hour. And then at 3 o'clock, we'll hear from Bill Bullard of RCAF on how to strengthen agriculture, especially the beef supply chain, which is very important in many, many communities in flyover country. And then we'll be presenting an award also to one of our members. So that's what's happening today. And I hope you enjoy it. I know it will be very informative, and I'm very glad you are here and showed up. And I'll turn it over to Mike Dolan and Stan Sorscher for Labor Talks. Thank you.
Hi, Stan. Can't hear you.
Very good, much better. Hi, Mike. So you wanted to say something right at the beginning?
Well, yeah, I just want to say hello to all my fellow board members and to CPA members. Stan's going to go first. He has a PowerPoint and talking about some of labor's priorities, at a larger policy level in this new administration, and our priorities, our traditions, and our opposition to the free trade lobby. After that, I don't have a PowerPoint. And so I'll just be talking about some of the things that bring the Teamsters, in North America's supply chain union, into collaboration and coalition with CPA these many years. And now back to you in the booth, Stan, and why don't you start, and then I'll pick up when you're done.
Okay, very good. Thanks. I think Melissa is running the PowerPoint. There we go. Thank you. Thanks, Melissa and Michael and everybody for setting up this session. We really appreciate it. We think things have been going fairly well. If we could see that first slide for a second, the opening slide. I was in Oregon once talking to a district director for a member of Congress, and she said to me, we do a lot of town hall meetings. Nobody's passion is trade. And I was offended. And then I thought, you know what? She's absolutely right. People do have passions, and they're motivated by it. And that's what motivates them. It's just trade isn't it. They become interested in trade when trade becomes an obstacle to what is their passion. So Michael Stumo, I think, comes out of the agricultural sector. He's seen what's happened to him and his community. Dan D'Amico and Brian O'Shaughnessy, are interested in steel and copper. Bill Bullard is also passionate about family farms. You can see it in the way they talk. So that's kind of where I'm going to go, is put this trade policy issue into a larger context. One thing I always start out with is this false framing that we get a lot of times. You're for trade, which means free trade, and if you're not for free trade, you must be against trade. union brothers and sisters in my industry, in the aerospace industry, always wanted me to say something at the beginning of every trade conversation. We're 100% in favor of trade. We make the products the rest of the world wants to buy. Our jobs are dependent on trade. I've never met anyone who's against trade, right? So that's just a starting thing. And when anybody says, for or against trade, immediately that's a red flag for me. Next. So what's a better framing? A better framing that I really like is that the purpose of an economy is to raise living standards, to improve well-being. We can make some billionaires along the way. The point is the test, the measure of an economy is raising living standards. And then correspondingly, the purpose of a political system is to make sure that the economy does in fact raise living standards and improve well-being. A second principle related is that every country has legitimate national interests, and that our trade policy and all of our policies should reflect those national interests. Trade theory says that both trading partner countries will benefit overall, with some winners and losers. There's a famous joke in economics that the winners could compensate the losers. In fact, the point of winning is to win. You don't win to compensate losers. So I think it just gets us off at a better start if we have principles like these for the way we want to manage globalization. And again, we have to be careful. We can have legitimate national interests without being nationalists. So there's a gray area there that we should always be sensitive to. Next. Oh, here we are. Yeah. Another rhetorical trap that I see a lot is people use these two words interchangeably, trade or global economic integration. To me, trade is that quaint 19th century thing, with the schooners and the three-masted sailing ships and all that other, very 19th century. What we're talking about really is global economic integration is very different from trade. So global economic integration merges our economy into the global economy, blurs national boundaries and our national identity, national interests. And implicit in that, you can do that a lot of ways. The way we do it is to prioritize the interests of global investors and global corporations. There's another thing that kind of slides along with that is that somehow if trade is good, more trade is better, maximum possible trade. And again, because you're thinking in terms of integrating our economy into the global economy. Next. There's a different way of thinking. If you think in terms of having a national interest and a national identity, then you should have a national strategy and a national industrial strategy. For us, the way we think about that is, especially at CPA, is to rebuild our industrial base. We're thinking about cultivating industries of the future, raising living standards. What that means is that what I'm saying is this is a departure. It's a different conceptual framework. And what that means is that incrementalism won't get us from here to there. That was, I think, the objection to the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the USMCA. We start with a template of the old system and we're going to make improvements. You can get improvements, that's good, and people fight, for decades for improvements. Better would be just to start with a different conceptual framework and build in the features that you want. An example, we look at China all the time, and China is not playing fair. China's not playing by the rules. I have not always, but for many years, I've thought China's not cheating. They're playing a different game. So their background is, and their priorities come from Marxism, where the highest priority is to acquire the means of production. That's what they're after. Once they, as they acquire the means of production, that becomes the foundation for their geopolitical power. So when we expect them to play by our rules, we're really missing the point. And we're missing that point that they're acting in their national interests. I think Zach and some other people in the panels yesterday kind of talked about that. This is something we should keep in the front of our mind. We could talk a lot about the motivations and consequences, but the point is that China's behavior. The point is that China is very intentional and strategic about what they're doing. Next, please. Here's an example. The previous slide was their industrial strategy. Here's their infrastructure strategy. They call One Belt, One Road. I'm the only one here who can read the little red and blue letters. The red line is economic belt, and the blue line is the maritime road. This is a geopolitical infrastructure strategy. We are economically dependent on China. Japan and South Korea are economically dependent on China. When the Secretary of State went to visit, this week or last week, this was kind of the backdrop, talking to Japan and South Korea. The connections, the economic connections to China are just very strong. China wants to extend and consolidate that dependence of other countries on them through their infrastructure strategy. And again, this is part of their intentional strategic strategy. So strategic strategy, for lack of better expression. Next, please. We have had national strategies in our past, in the 19th century, in the 20th century, where we kind of take for granted that we had the New Deal, the space program, lots of other social programs. The picture on the left is from the Tennessee Valley Authority that was managed by members of my international union, IFPTE. On the right is the Ames National Laboratory in California. NASA has about 20 facilities around the country. This again is part of a national strategy for aerospace. We're all familiar with the interstate system. We have done this based on our own principles and our own priorities, and we have been very effective with this in the past. So it's not that big a shock. Next, please. So there's a metaphor that I use. Some people think it's kind of weird, but domestic policies are the dog that wags the tail, and trade policy is the tail. So our domestic policies are the dog that wags the trade policy tail. When we have fought in the past over the Korea trade agreement or TPP, we're always fighting against something. Now we're starting to shift to fighting for what we want, because our trade policies are shifting. The old domestic policies, the neoliberal policies, naturally had a free trade tail, wagged the free trade tail. So we were always swimming upstream. If we can establish a national industrial manufacturing strategy, it will have its own tail, and we can fight for things. So that's really an important shift. Next. So let's think about that, getting a new dog in our domestic policies. The way I think about this, a lot of other people think about this, is where we see a lot of passion is in inequality, climate change. These are arguably the defining challenges of our time. I see them, and a lot of other people see them, as the two biggest market failures in human history. So we need effective national strategies to address them. Those strategies can include market forces, but they cannot be solved by market strategies alone. And again, when you start thinking of this in general, there are a lot of domestic policies that we think about. We have legitimate discussions about health policy, education, transportation, R&D, workforce, food safety. The trick is to make them coherent. So again, looking ahead, the way I look ahead at this, in a post-neoliberal world, trade policy will establish an optimal level of trade, not a maximum level of trade. An interesting example of this is the supply management dairy thing in Canada. I think Mike will talk about this. I was at the National Farmers Union convention. They actually think it's a pretty good idea the way Canada has managed its dairy supply. It's one of their advocacy areas. Canada decided it was in their national interest to have sustainable, prosperous dairy farm sector in their economy to support rural communities. Rural communities need business, local retail. They have to sustain schools and healthcare. And they decided in Canada it was in their national interest to make sure that family farms were economically sustainable. We used to have supply management in our country. We don't. And rural communities in America are experiencing more or less the same consequences that we've seen in the manufacturing areas in the United States in terms of decline of local communities and well-being that we've seen in the Midwest and the Northeast. So again, the trick is to make all of this coherent, to make a coherent national strategy. I think that's it for me. I'd be glad to talk to people later on. There's really a lot more to say. My experience is that these conversations are best in the presence of beer. There's really a lot going on there. So Mike, glad to hear from you.
Oh, great. Terrific. I'm on screen again. Hello. Great. Yeah, so I guess I'll just start by saying the dairy issue that Stan referred to actually refers to the first petition that was filed under the United States, Mexico, NAFTA 2.0 under the new USMCA. The first petition filed was in opposition to Canada on dairy market access. I'll just say that the Teamsters are, North America's dairy workers union. Got a lot of workers in that supply chain, both in the US and in Canada. We're a genuine international union, and we're opposed to that petition for the reasons, frankly, that Stan just mentioned. I don't want to get way into the weeds about that and our expectations for USMCA implementation, not just on dairy, but as well with respect to labor rights in Mexico, a big part of the renegotiation of the NAFTA. But we supported USMCA ratification. But I'm going to back up a little bit. So yes, I am the trade policy guy at the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. And I've been a CPA board member for many years, through a couple of Congresses, several administrations. And the Teamsters Union, 1.4 million members, US and Canada, as I mentioned, were North America's supply chain union. All the truck drivers and the freight rail crews, the locomotive engineers and trainmen. We're at the ports with driving trucks in and out of the ports. We are in the warehouses all over America. We are genuinely, as much as any other union, genuinely involved in the supply chains. And that's why, like Stan, our union is pro-trade. Trade is good for our members. Our members' livelihoods depend on trade, on fair trade. And that's what I've been working on for a lot of years. Actually, even before I joined the Teamsters, my advocacy for fair trade goes way back. In the mid-90s, I was a Ralph Nader guy. Clinton was in the White House. He had just gotten NAFTA passed by negotiating unenforceable side agreements on labor and on the environment. And then he worked across the aisle to expand the NAFTA model in free trade agreements like the US-Colombia Agreement, the Caribbean Basin Initiative, the Multilateral Agreement on Investments, and of course, Permanent Normal Trade Relations, PNTR, for China. And we were opposed to these things. And of course, he also wanted fast track, right? or it's as it's called now, Trade Promotion Authority. You all understand that as the fairly regular abdication by Congress of its exclusive authority under Article 1, Section 8, the Commerce Among Nations. That's what Fast Track was, and Bill Clinton needed that. He needed Fast Track in order to achieve his free trade goals and all those agreements that I just described. And I had the honor of working at the grassroots level in opposition to all those initiatives in that administration in the late 90s. And I recall that in 1999, he invited the World Trade Organization, Clinton did, to hold a ministerial meeting in the U.S., up there where you are, Stan, in Seattle, which is, as its congressional delegation never tires of telling us, the most trade-dependent state in the lower 48. And I'll return to the point about the WTO and what we did in Seattle in '99, and I'll return to that in a minute. But what I want to do right now is really emphasize the bipartisanship at the grassroots level. Now, this is a hallmark of the Coalition for Prosperous America. Its vision and its mission is that bipartisan grassroots mobilization that backs up what we do now in Washington, D.C. As I mentioned, I'm the trade lobbyist for the Teamsters Union. So that bipartisanship goes way back. Who remembers Ross Perot? Well, it's a rhetorical question because I can't see you, but Ross Perot, United We Stand America, the Reform Party, remember that? As the field director of a progressive fair trade coalition of labor, environmental, family farm, consumer, faith-based groups back then, I found common cause with the Perotistas, as we called them. We were listening together for the predicted and inevitable great sucking sound as NAFTA was implemented. And together, working together across a partisan divide that didn't really exist on trade policy. Trade policy cuts across party lines. We defeated Fast Track under Clinton. It was a huge victory. Clinton tried to get it passed twice, 97 and 98, and he failed both times because of the bipartisan mobilization against NAFTA expansion, those agreements that I mentioned a minute ago. Oh, he had war rooms set up in the White House. He had the full-on support of the Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, and the rest of the transnational corporate free trade lobby. But we had the great and good transpartisan fair trade lobby. I organized a lot of that, traveling around the country, making the connection at the grassroots level. I'll tell you a true story. United We Stand America, that patriotic Perot network, some of you will remember it. They had distributed congressional candidate questionnaires nationally in the 94 and the 96 election cycles. The candidate questionnaires. The questions included NAFTA, obviously, and Fast Track. The responses in these questionnaires from all the congressional candidates were maintained in local UWSA, local United We Stand America chapters, and I had a list of the lead Perotistas in every state. So when Clinton and the free traders started to whip Fast Track on Capitol Hill, their targets included freshman and sophomore Republican members, including, and I remember this, a member of the Utah delegation who was wavering. So I called Salt Lake City or Provo or wherever it was, and I asked the United We Stand America state lead to find that particular Congress critter's questionnaire. And sure enough, he had committed to oppose Fast Track. Well, fax it to me, I said. Fax it to the district office to remind them. And you know what? Within a couple of hours, that member's office had issued a press release proclaiming that member's opposition to Fast Track. That's how we did it. We leveraged the work that we had done at a bipartisan level, and we got a commitment, and ultimately Fast Track failed thanks to that bipartisan mobilization. That happened all over during that Congress, and like I say, we won that fight. My point is that bipartisan grassroots mobilization is central to our strategy today to achieve our shared goals for a worker-focused trade policy, which Zach emphasized yesterday when the conference began, and I appreciated that. It happens to be something that the Biden administration is talking about now. More about that in a minute. Frankly, it's what CPA does now and must do more of going forward. In my opinion, all CPA members are grassroots lobbyists. Every one of you, as well as the 2 friends or colleagues that Zach correctly, I think, wants you to be in touch with after this historic conference. One last anecdote to make one more point. I mentioned Seattle 99 a minute ago. To get ready for that, again, I traveled all around the country making the connections, educating people about how the WTO was handing down judicial decisions from Geneva that were undermining, frankly, sub-federal and federalism and the kinds of labor laws or environmental or consumer protections that we and other countries, enacted. And so this court in Geneva was undermining our fair trade agenda. And I went around the country talking about it. And then in November of 1999, there I was with 50,000 of my closest friends from all across the different constituencies, fair trade constituencies. We locked it down, and WTO ministerial delegations couldn't get into the Washington Fair Trade Convention place there. Stan will remember this. He's there in Seattle. It was a huge victory. The WTO left town, their tail between their legs, without which they came for, without that new round of negotiations, the so-called millennial round. This is late 99, the Seattle round. They didn't get to launch that because we shut it down. And our critique won the day. But the point I want to make here, and this is important as I emphasize the importance of the grassroots mobilization. It's something that I learned when I wore a younger man's clothes. I was taught this by the United Farm Workers. And I think this is actually, Cesar Chavez said this, or maybe it was Annette Funicello. I don't know. It was, but it's an important thing to think about. It's an aphorism. It goes like this. We educate people in order to organize them. We don't organize the people in order to educate them. That's an important focal distinction. What we do, CPA and coalitions like CPA, there aren't really actually any coalitions like CPA, sadly, but what we do is we're educating people in order to organize them to take political action at a policy level with the United States Congress and to influence the conversation in Washington, D.C. We can't do that without the support from the field. So now I'm a lobbyist. I used to be a field organizer. I'm not getting any younger. This is what I do now. And like CPA's government relations program, like what we do with the Teamsters, what we do throughout the labor movement, we depend on the great and good grassroots. So that's enough of the anecdotage from the old days. So I'll go back to the future. So now I am with the labor movement. And as I mentioned earlier, I've been working with CPA and its allies through multiple administrations and multiple Congresses. During the Obama years, we fought the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is frankly just another expansion of the flawed and failed NAFTA model, working both sides of the aisle simultaneously, coordinating with the Tea Party. Yeah, that's right. They're sort of the modern Perotistas, the new expression of that populist, transpartisan indignation at the free trade lobby, the Tea Party and other trade patriots, coast to coast, frustrating the free traders. Obama couldn't get it done, couldn't get the TPP done because of our effective bipartisan opposition. And then we know what happened in 2016 and the subsequent U.S. withdrawal from the TPP talks. These are victories that I'm talking about in the past, and I'm describing to you how we achieve those victories. And I'm describing to you how CPA is central to advance our shared goals of a pro-worker trade policy under the Biden administration and in the 117th Congress. I can talk about the renegotiation of NAFTA as a cleared advisor. I'm on, President Hoff is on both the Advisory Committee for Trade Policy Negotiations and with the other labor leaders, the Labor Advisory Committee. I was able to attend just about every round of talks from Ottawa and Montreal to here in DC, down to Mexico City. I went to all those rounds of NAFTA renegotiation. And I can explain really, and I can talk, with any questions, why the Teamsters ultimately supported, ratification of USMCA in the last administration. And Bob Lighthizer was the USTR. I can explain, for example, the cross-border trucking issue from the original deal and how it got fixed in NAFTA 2.0 to reduce the threat of unsafe Mexican carriers and unfair competition for our members, truck drivers, and the owner-operator independent drivers. OIDA is the name of that group. We work together with the independent drivers to fix the, cross-border trucking problem that Clinton, legacy of Clinton's NAFTA. And I can describe that. It was a big issue for the Teamsters. But with the time remaining, I really just will enumerate some of our priorities, labor, going forward, working with the slim Democratic majorities in this Congress and with the Biden administration, including the new USTR, Catherine Tai, a friend of this union, a friend of mine, and with the new Buy American director in the White House. We don't know who that is yet. They haven't identified, but that's a position that's going to be there in the White House to be announced. Can't wait to find out. But what are some of those issues? Buy American is clearly one of them. Eliminating the waivers under the Trade Agreements Act, the waivers to Buy American. The reshoring of manufacturing, which is, a related issue, right? The reshoring of manufacturing, which is the highest priority for the Coalition for a Prosperous America, right? Very high priority. And also for Democrats and Republicans alike in this Congress, which is why we and CPA are talking with them together now that the Congress is a couple of months old. That's right. We're having the meetings. Well, they're like this. I don't get to go up on Capitol Hill and, show them my card yet, but, eventually, do that. The USMCA enforcement, big issue for labor. Especially on labor rights. There's a new rapid response mechanism to enforce the labor chapter, which is now incorporated into the agreement, unlike the side agreement that Clinton negotiated in order to get the NAFTA passed. Now we have a labor chapter, chapter 30, is it 31 of the USMCA. Incredibly important to the labor movement to raise labor standards, right? Not diminish them, not to downwardly harmonize labor standards to the lowest common denominator so that transnational corporations can outsource, labor to the cheapest place. We want to raise them up. This is a big priority for labor, always has been. Country of origin labeling. The Teamsters and other unions like the United Food and Commercial Workers, there's others, we're in support of country of origin labeling. As John Logan from Ohio Farmers Union, John Hansen from the Nebraska Farmers Union, as Bill Bullard understands, these are important issues throughout the food supply chains. The Teamsters represent a lot of workers in food processing. Country of origin labeling is a priority. Currency, which is a big emphasis. Michael mentioned it. Great panel yesterday on currency misalignment. So currency manipulation and currency misalignment, big priority for us. And thank heavens for CPA that we can work together. The Teamsters supported the market access charge, the MAC, last year. Tammy Baldwin's bill, you'll be hearing from her later today. Big issue for us, and we're ready to work together with you at the grassroots level to get that done. The WTO. Yeah, I mentioned the WTO. But, limits, we want to reform the WTO radically for the same reasons and the same critique that we brought to the streets of Seattle in '99. I'll give particular emphasis on the plurilateral agreement within the WTO called the Government Procurement Agreement, the GPA. That's something that interferes, obviously, with our Buy America agenda, as will probably be described on the Buy American panel. And my brother, Brad Markell from the AFL-CIO, will be part of that discussion later on. What else? No fast track, no TPA, no Congress. Do not abdicate your exclusive authority under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Hold on to that. We don't want to see a new fast track, and we will oppose that if it should rear its ugly head again this summer when the current TPA grant is scheduled to expire. Finally, I'll just say greater engagement and greater transparency in the advisory system to the USTR. As I mentioned, I have the honor of being President Hoffa's liaison to a couple of those advisory committees. We'd like to see more. We'd like to see CPA having, for example, greater density, a greater footprint in the advisory system in a formal way with the, security clearance that I have as a liaison. So those are just some of the priorities for labor, and I want to emphasize how they dovetail with the agenda, the policy agenda of the Coalition for a Prosperous America. And I'll conclude by just saying a couple things, and then we can go to a video or answer some questions or whatever you all like. But it's this. If CPA did not exist, we'd have to invent it. That's how central CPA is to the mission, the vision of fair trade as a policy matter in America today, going into this Congress and going into the Biden administration. For my part, I'll just say this. I've been with CPA, running with these guys for a bunch of years. I'm kind of reminded of a definition of love. Yeah, of love that I picked up from some poet or another some years back. And it's this. Love is not looking deep into each other's bifocal, bipartisan eyes, deeply getting lost, looking at one another. No. You know what love is? Love is two people looking off together in the same direction. And that's what we're doing in a bipartisan way, looking together in the same direction. And frankly, that's why I love CPA. And with that, I will conclude, and back to you in the booth, Melissa or Stan, and happy to take any questions. We have a fair amount of time left on the clock. Are you still there, Stan?
I am. Melissa, did you get any questions that we can think about? You're muted.
Hi, guys. I have no direct questions for you, but I have some really great comments. members that are in our events online right now are saying that, Mike, you have so much energy, you're very engaging. Stan, you brought a lot of expertise to the China issue and the whole entire runway down of their trail. All of our members right now that are watching are saying that you guys are great advocates for workers, fair trade, and CPA. And, you know, the way that you both are able to educate individuals and bring us into your world and get excited for things is just amazing. So thank you guys very much for joining us today. I did go ahead and share out the links on the Fast Track article that was written on you, Mike Dolan. It is in the comment section online, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and we've also shared it onto the platform. So if you haven't visited that link yet, please get a little bit more insight to see who Mike Dolan really is. You got a small little taste of him today live, and he's just like this, energetic every single day. I really do enjoy hearing you speak.
Can I just add, you know, this has been incredible, Melissa. You've done such a great job. This conference is, and we've all done a bunch of webinars and Zooms and stuff all last year and all the rest. This is absolutely the best choreographed, most, you know, best flowing conference that I've been in for many, many months. But I want to say this, next year, we're going to be together again in person. Right? When we do this annual conference in person, I will look forward to seeing as many members as possible, certainly all my fellow board members, you too, Stan, and we will convene as we have in the past, and as we have done in the past, we will lobby the Congress together. We'll have the Congress, a hotel, and then we're going to go up on Capitol Hill. And we're going to be talking to Democrats, we're going to be talking to Republicans, we're going to be congressmen, the senators. It's going to be great. We've done it in the past, and a lot of you know what I'm talking about. I'm looking forward to that. And I just want to say again how much I appreciate how this conference has come together. I'm really, really impressed.
Well, thank you very much. I do appreciate it. The content to be able to put everything together is really simple and easy when I'm working with CPA members as yourself and Stan and our panelists that appeared yesterday. And I'm just really excited to see what's in store today on our tax panel and Buy American panel. We have a really great lineup.
Me too.
All right. Very good. Thank you very much, Melissa.
Thank you guys very much. So that's going to conclude our welcome hour and labor talks for now. We do have a brief video. It's a 14-minute video. You're more than welcome to go ahead and watch it. It is going to go ahead and highlight one of our co-chairs of the Buy American panel, Greg Owens, and his company Liberty Tabletop. If you are joining us on our Hopin app to go ahead and live stream this conference, please feel free to go ahead and visit the expo booths. Also, feel free to get into the sessions and do a roundtable discussion and then do some one-on-one networking. I do appreciate everybody's time this morning. We look forward to seeing you live at 12:30 Eastern Standard Time for our tax policy panel. Thank you.